The trillionaire Arab executive discovers his African right-hand man's betrayal, and does this to get V&J. He trusted him with everything, his secrets, his business empire, even his life. For 15 years, Zayd al-Hakim, a self-made trillionaire from the Amorites, believed his African right-hand man, Otieno, was not just an employee, but a brother. Together, they built empires, silenced enemies, and faced crises that would have broken lesser men. But when Zayd discovers the cold, calculating disloyalty hidden behind years of loyalty, it doesn't just hurt, it destroys something inside him. Otieno hadn't just betrayed a man, he had betrayed a legacy. What Zayd does next will leave you breathless. It's not what you'd expect from a man known for elegance, diplomacy, and restraint. His vengeance is unlike anything the world has ever seen, strategic, emotional, and utterly unforgettable. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more powerful and inspiring stories like this one to you every single week. Now, stay with us until the end, because what this Arab executive does in response to betrayal might just change the way you see justice, power, and forgiveness forever. The call came just after midnight. Zayd al-Hakim rarely answered his phone at that hour, not unless it was about his mother or one of his overseas factories in crisis. But this time, it wasn't a voice he recognized. The man on the line sounded nervous, almost scared. He whispered only 2 sentences before hanging up. Otieno sold the land in Ghana behind your back. The offshore account is in his name. Zayd stared at the phone in disbelief. He sat in silence for a moment, his tailored robe open at the chest, a glass of mint tea untouched beside him. Outside the balcony of his palatial suite, the Dubai skyline shimmered like a kingdom of stars. But Zayd felt no wonder, only a cold pressure in his chest. Otieno, no, it couldn't be. Zayd al-Hakim was not just any billionaire. He was a man who had walked through fire to build what he had. Born in the outskirts of Abu Dhabi to a working-class family, he rose by sheer will, charm, and an instinct for business that made investors forget his humble beginnings. Now, at 43, he was considered the youngest trillionaire in the Gulf region. Tech, real estate, shipping arms, everything he touched became gold. And standing beside him through every step of the journey was Otieno. Otieno Kamau was a tall, imposing man from Nairobi, known in the al-Hakim group as the Shadow. Wherever Zayd went, Otieno was not far behind his fixer, his strategist, and sometimes his moral compass. They met in London as young men, both hustling their way through corporate backdoors. Otieno had stopped Zayd from signing a fraudulent oil deal once. After that, Zayd said, "I don't want to work with you, I want you to stand beside me, for life." And Otieno had, so Zayd thought. The next morning, Zayd didn't call he didn't ask questions, he didn't shout. He simply got dressed in silence, choosing a dark suit and no tie. He slid his father's prayer beads around his wrist. He didn't go to the tower or the boardroom. He went to the private investigation unit he quietly funded through an arm of his humanitarian foundation. Pull everything, he told the director, a French-Moroccan woman named Layla, emails, property records, transactions from the last 5 years. Otieno Kamau. Layla raised an eyebrow. Is there a threat? Zayd's expression didn't change. There is now. Within 3 hours, the evidence began to unravel like a rope burning at both ends. Offshore transfers, hidden properties, meetings with rival investors. One of the Ghana deals that Otieno had brokered on Zayd's behalf, land that was meant to house a solar energy hub for rural communities, had been transferred to a private holding registered in the Cayman Islands, under Otieno's name. More than that, Zayd saw photos, grainy surveillance captures of Otieno in a rooftop restaurant in Lagos. Dining with Harlan Voss, Zayd's heart didn't beat. It slammed. Voss was the man Zayd once called his nemesis, a ruthless European tycoon who had tried to sabotage multiple al-Hakim group deals in Africa, always hiding behind shell corporations. And now Otieno was dining with him, laughing. Betrayal didn't come to Zayd like a thunderclap. It came like slow acid, eating through the foundation of every memory he had trusted. Every trip to Nairobi, every drink after long boardroom wars, every time Otieno had said, "You rest, I'll take care of it." That night, Zayd drove alone into the desert, not with anger, but with grief. He parked his black Maybach on a dune and walked away from the lights. He needed silence. Not the silence of wealth or power, but the silence of origin. The kind of silence you find in sand and stars, where even your name feels irrelevant. He dropped to his knees, and for the first time in years, he prayed aloud, "Ya Allah, was I blind, or just lonely?" The wind didn't answer, but something inside him shifted. He returned just before dawn, the sand still clinging to his trousers. He showered, shaved, and called Layla again. "Confirm all assets Otieno controls that are still under my name," he said. "Freeze them quietly, notify no one." Then he walked to the full-length window of his penthouse. Zayd's reflection stared back at him. Not the global mogul who graced magazine covers. Not the charismatic speaker who once addressed the United Nations. Just a man alone, betrayed. He would not act impulsively. No, that was not who he was. He would wait. and when the moment came, he would make Otieno understand what it means to betray the man who made you rich, the man who called you brother, because Zayd wasn't just going to remove him from the empire, he was going to teach him a lesson that echoed louder than rage, a lesson that would shake the walls of every palace and slum in Africa, in the Middle East. Because in Zayd's world, betrayal wasn't punished by pain, it was punished by legacy. Zayd al-Hakim stood behind the one-way glass of the boardroom, arms crossed, eyes unmoving. Below him, on the 42nd floor of Al-Hakim Tower, the Executive Council gathered for their monthly strategy session. The polished wood table gleamed under the light of the chandeliers, and men in suits shuffled nervously as the seat at the head of the table remained empty. Zayd's seat. Otieno sat in his usual spot, third from the right, hands folded calmly, eyes scanning the documents as if he owned the room. He even smiled at one of the newer board members. That smile, the one Zayd had seen in dozens of countries, in front of world leaders, investors, and enemies. A calm, assuring grin that said, "I'm in control." Now Zayd understood it differently. That smile wasn't confidence, it was betrayal, dressed in diplomacy. He turned away from the glass and walked back into his private office, where Layla waited. The tablet in her hand displayed the latest intelligence. Otiono's Cayman account had received 2 new transfers from an entity linked to Harlan Voss. One payment was listed as consulting fee, another as asset compensation. Still, no sign he suspects anything. Zayd asked without looking at her. None, Layla said. He believes you're in Doha for the finance summit. His assistant even scheduled your return for next week. Zayd nodded slowly. Perfect. For now, Zayd wanted him to feel safe. He wanted Otieno to believe everything was still as it had always been, because when the moment came, he didn't want Otieno to just fall. He wanted him to understand. Understand who he had betrayed. Understand what he had lost. Understand that loyalty wasn't a business transaction, it was sacred. Zayd closed the folder on his desk and reached for the Quran that rested on the shelf behind him. He wasn't a devout man in the traditional sense, but he had his moments, particularly in times of war. And this was a war, not of weapons, but of silence, strategy, consequence. Have the legal team in Abu Dhabi begin the quiet transfer of voting shares, he said. Otieno's name comes off everything in 48 hours. Understood, Layla. Zayd looked up. Find the boy. She blinked. The boy. Yes, the Ghanaian orphan. Otieno convinced me to sponsor Jemmy. She tapped her tablet instantly. I'll locate him. Zayd turned back to the glass. The meeting below was ending. Otieno stood, shook hands, adjusted his cuff. He looked sharp. Charcoal suit, gold watch, custom leather shoes. For a second it felt like the past, like the man Zayd had trusted still existed, but that illusion was long dead. What Zayd remembered most, more than any business deal or negotiation, was one night in Kenya. They were in a bar after winning their first government contract. It was raining outside. Zayd had barely taken a sip of his drink when Otieno said, "My people will never trust you the way they trust me, but I will never let them touch you." Zayd had laughed and raised his glass. "Then we rule together. Until the last breath," Otieno had answered. Now Zayd saw the truth in that moment. Otieno had never wanted to share power. He had simply been waiting for it. That night, Otieno returned to his villa in Emirates Hills, unaware that his security cameras had been disabled by someone inside his own team. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stepped out to his terrace. Watching the skyline with a sense of satisfaction, he was close. Just a few more weeks, and Zayd would sign off on the Mozambique mining deal, another contract Otieno had already redirected behind his back. He had played it well. Zayd was powerful, yes, but too sentimental, too trusting. Otieno had never forgotten where he came from. A slum in Nairobi, where trust got you killed. He learned early, if you wanted to survive, you had to think 5 moves ahead. Zayd was brilliant, but not ruthless. That's where Otieno had the advantage. He took a slow sip of his drink, savoring the thought of the future, but 20 minutes later, a notification blinked on his tablet. His access to the El Hakim Foundation's main accounts had been revoked. Then, another ping. His biometric login to the group's secure communications server failed. And then another, user authorization invalid. Otieno froze. He walked quickly inside, pulled up a secondary system, tried bypass codes. Nothing. Then, his phone rang. Zayd's number. He hesitated, then answered. Zayd, I thought you were in Doha. I was. Zayd's voice was calm. Too calm. But betrayal has a way of changing travel plans. Otieno's face stiffened. I don't know what I gave you a kingdom, Zayd interrupted, and you sold it for a few pieces of silver. Silence. Zayd continued, you didn't just steal from me, you lied to my face. You shook my hand while planning to stab my back. You made me believe I had a brother. Otieno said nothing. His mind was already racing. Who talked? How much did Zayd know? I hope the money was worth it, Zayd said softly, because starting tomorrow, you'll watch your world fall apart one piece at a time, and there will be nothing you can do to stop it. Zayd listened, but the line went dead. Otieno stared at the phone. He had underestimated him. Zayd wasn't just rich, he was a storm, and it had just begun. Back in the tower, Zaid placed the phone down and exhaled. He didn't feel satisfaction, he felt grief, and resolve. Otiono would face a reckoning not with violence, but with truth, exposure, and consequence. Because the worst kind of revenge isn't the one that ends in blood, it's the one that ends in silence. When the world watches, you lose everything you once held dear, and that was just the beginning. The following day, Otiono awoke to 27 missed calls and 8 emails flagged as urgent. His legal team in Nairobi was panicked. One of the holding companies he controlled on paper, at least, had been frozen. The bank in Zurich that once welcomed his transactions without question was now requesting verification of authority. He grabbed his phone, called his private banker in Geneva. "Mr. Kamau," the banker said nervously, "we received direct communication from El Hakim Global Holdings. There is a formal dispute over ownership rights. We've frozen your account pending investigation." Otiono's voice dropped. "I built those companies. I negotiated every asset myself." "Yes, sir. But the majority voting power, the trusts, the registration documents, they're all still under Mr. Al-Hakim's legal umbrella." Otiono stood in his marble-floored kitchen, staring at the glass wall that overlooked his rose garden. This wasn't just a retaliation, it was surgical. Zaid wasn't just trying to ruin him, he was reclaiming everything, without touching a single law. He knew Otiono had never truly believed it would come to this. Not with Zaid, he'd assumed, at worst, the man would demand an explanation, perhaps, even yell, throw a glass across a room. But this quiet dismantling of his empire, it was terrifying, because it meant Zaid had planned it. He paced in silence, trying to find the weak spot. Zaid wouldn't go public, not yet. He cared too much about the company's image. That gave Otiono time. If he could move fast, call in favors, threaten the right people, he could salvage part of the structure. But as the hours ticked by, more damage arrived. In Qatar, a subsidiary, he had quietly funneled funds into was audited without warning. In Morocco, a minister he'd bribed was now under investigation, and Otiono's name was leaking into internal memos. In Nigeria, 3 land deals he had arranged under fake corporations were suddenly challenged in court by anonymous legal teams. Zaid wasn't just using money, he was using reach, and that made him unstoppable. Otiono sat down and opened the photo that had haunted him for months. It was of him and Zaid, 7 years ago, laughing at a bonfire retreat in the desert, their arms around each other, brothers, or so he thought. Then, Otiono had genuinely believed in their bond. But over the years, something in him had shifted. Maybe it was envy, maybe it was exhaustion. He'd watched Zaid be praised as a visionary, as a builder of nations. But Otiono was always in the shadow, always the one behind the scenes. He had power, yes, but not recognition. And in this world, recognition was currency. So he started carving out his own path. Quietly, he convinced himself it wasn't betrayal, it was independence. But now, Zaid had drawn a line, and Otiono was on the wrong side. Meanwhile, Zaid sat in silence inside the majlis of his desert estate in Liwa. No glass walls here, no gold, no cameras, just clay walls, soft rugs, and the wind outside. Across from him sat Kwame, now 19. The boy Otiono had once convinced Zaid to sponsor through school. Zaid had found him studying engineering at a small university in Ghana, living modestly in a dorm room he shared with 3 others. "Do you know why I brought you here?" Zaid asked. Kwame looked nervous. "I thought maybe it was about my scholarship, or the internship." Zaid studied him, then gently placed a tablet in front of him. On it was a photo Kwame as a child, standing beside Otiono holding a signed document. "I was told Otiono arranged for your education," Zaid said, "but I also found that the funds used to sponsor you came from a foundation account he disguised under a shell company. Meaning, he used your story to launder money." Kwame paled. "I don't believe you knew," Zaid continued. "You were just a child. But I need you to tell me everything you remember. Every visit, every document, every signature." Kwame hesitated. "He always said he was helping me, that it was private because it made you look too generous." Zaid's jaw clenched. The manipulation went deeper than he thought. "Tell me everything," he said again, and the boy did. That night, Zaid walked alone under the desert stars, hands behind his back, face lit only by the moonlight. The sands whispered like memories. His mind drifted to his father, a man who once worked 18-hour shifts in an oil refinery and died before Zaid made his first billion. He remembered his father's one great lesson: a man's word is a mirror. Break it, and the pieces will cut you every time you look back. Zaid felt every cut now. Otiono wasn't just a friend, he had been family, a witness to his rise, his darkest nights, and the long, lonely path of building an empire no one believed in, and still he had sold him out. Zaid whispered a prayer into the wind, not for mercy, but for clarity. Because what came next wouldn't just affect one man, it would reshape entire networks, reputations, histories. He walked back to the Majlis and picked up his phone. "Layla," he said, "I want to leak the Voss meeting photos to the South African press. Attach Otiono's name to every land deal in Ghana. Do it anonymously." "Yes, sir." "Oh, and Layla," he paused. "Call every investor tied to the Mozambique project. Tell them Otino's name will no longer be associated, and that the real owner of the deal is coming to the table personally. Layla hesitated. You mean you? Zaid's eyes gleamed. I'm done watching from behind the curtain because this wasn't just personal anymore, it was legacy. The news broke 3 days later. In an explosive exposé published by the Johannesburg Tribune, readers across Africa and the Middle East woke to headlines that read, "Billionaire's right-hand man secretly linked to corrupt land deals ties to European tycoon exposed." Otieno Kamau's face, once known only in private circles, now filled every news feed and WhatsApp group across 3 continents. Side-by-side photos of him shaking hands with foreign ministers were now juxtaposed with grainy surveillance stills. Of his rooftop meeting with Harlan Voss, Zaid didn't speak publicly. He didn't need to. He let the silence speak for him, and the world listened. The fallout was immediate. In Nairobi, Otino's family home was surrounded by reporters. In Ghana, protesters stood outside the solar site that never materialized, chanting for justice. In Zurich, bank officials launched internal reviews into their compliance procedures, and within the Al Hakim group, rumors spread like wildfire. Did you hear? Otieno's out. They say he betrayed Zaid, but he was family. Zaid watched it all unfold from the edge of his private garden in Liwa, a steaming cup of Arabian coffee in his hand. The desert stretched endlessly before him, silent, majestic, unbothered by the noise of men. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Because real revenge wasn't about satisfaction, it was about alignment. Restoring what had been thrown off. Balance. Layla approached with her tablet. Her expression, as always, was composed. The Mozambique investors have confirmed they're removing Otieno from the deal. Zaid nodded, and the press controlled. They don't mention your name, only sources close to the Al Hakim group. Good. He leaned forward and looked at the chessboard on the table in front of him. A game mid-play. The Black King stood alone, cornered. The White Queen loomed. Any move left for him? Zaid asked, not looking up. Layla hesitated. He's hiring a crisis management team out of London. They've been told to dig into your history, your early days. Zaid's eyes narrowed slightly. He's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. Yes, Zaid said, sipping his coffee. But this is not a war he can win with scandal. My past isn't clean, Layla, but it's mine. I've never hidden it. She tilted her head. And if he tries to make it public, let him, Zaid said. The people who admire me don't do so because I was perfect. They do it because I never pretended to be. Meanwhile, Otino sat in a dark hotel room in Doha, the curtains drawn, his suit jacket thrown over a chair. He stared at the television news anchors reporting his alleged connections to corrupt deals. While playing B-roll footage of him with Voss, his phone buzzed. It was Voss, Otieno answered with a growl. You said they wouldn't find anything. I underestimated him, Voss replied. I told you Zaid plays the long game. I warned you not to move until you had complete control. Otino's jaw tightened. I had control. No, Voss said calmly. You had access. That's different. Otieno hung up. He was running out of Olisandwars, out of narrative. The media had framed him. Zaid, ever the ghost, hadn't denied or confirmed anything. He'd let Otieno hang himself with the very rope he was so sure he could wield. Otieno stood, ran his hands over his face, and stared at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Zaid was watching and waiting. He wouldn't beg, but he needed leverage. Anything then. He remembered something. A contract. Old, forgotten, signed in the early days before Zaid became a trillionaire. A document that, if revealed, could damage the very core of Al Hakim's reputation. It wasn't illegal, but it was dirty. He opened his laptop, searched his archives, fingers trembling slightly. There it was, an agreement showing Al Hakim Group's early collaboration with a mining firm in the DRC, one later accused of environmental violations. Zaid had pulled out of the deal the moment he learned about it, but the initial signature was there. His name? Otieno smiled for the first time in days. Finally, a move back in Liwa. Zaid was on the phone with his mother. You sound tired, she said gently, her voice crackling over the line from Abu Dhabi. I'm awake, he replied. Just watching things move? You don't have to fight everyone alone, Zaid. I'm not fighting everyone, Mama. Just one man who forgot who he was. There was a pause. He wasn't always like this, she said. Otieno was a good man, Zaid exhaled. He still is. Somewhere, but good men who forget their principles are more dangerous than bad ones. She didn't argue. Come home soon, she whispered. Let the dessert heal you. I will, he promised. After this is finished. The next day, the document leaked. An anonymous post on a global watchdog site claimed Zaid had profited from unethical mining. Within hours, hashtags appeared. Hashtag Al Hakim exposed trended briefly. Some investors panicked. Layla stormed into Zaid's study. It's the DRC file. He found it. Zaid looked up slowly. Let it breathe, sir. Don't fight it. Let it spread. Then prepare the footage. From the village we funded, the medical wing, the rehabilitation center, and the children's school that now runs on solar power, because we pulled out of that mine and redirected every cent. You want to release that? Yes, at dawn. Layla's eyes glinted. That's perfect. Zaid closed his laptop. He wants to burn my legacy, but I already turned that fire into light. He stood and looked out at the rising sun. Let him try to burn me, he whispered. I've already risen from ashes. Otieno couldn't sleep. The leak had given him only a moment of peace, just long enough to feel like he was back in the game. The document had spread across watchdog forums and conspiracy channels like wildfire. He imagined Zaid pacing in his tower, scrambling his PR teams, trying to silence the waves of online rage. But instead, there was silence. Too much silence. No press release. No counterattack. No public appearance from Zaid. Then, at precisely dawn, the silence shattered. A video began circulating on major news platforms. It opened not with Zaid, but with the faces of children laughing, studying, drawing under solar lights in a school, deep in the Congolese countryside. The footage was raw and beautiful. A documentary-style narrative followed. Local elders testified how the Al-Hakim group pulled out of a controversial mining project and returned with a humanitarian wing. They showed clinics, solar fields, a freshwater system funded entirely by Zaid's personal fortune. And then, Zaid's voice entered, soft and clear. When I was young, I saw my father's back bent under the weight of labor. I swore I'd build something that would lift others. When I discovered our early partners' wrongdoings, I had a choice, silence or accountability. I chose the path that cost me money, but gave me peace. The video ended with Zaid standing in the village, dressed not in his usual custom suit, but in a white thobe, shaking hands with children and their parents. The caption read, "The past isn't always perfect, but legacy is what you choose to build after you learn the truth." Within hours, public opinion flipped. Hashtags that once attacked Zaid turned into messages of admiration. Hashtag real leadership trended worldwide. Commentators praised him for transparency, for putting his money where others wrote apologies. Even skeptical outlets grudgingly called it a masterclass in ethical rebranding. Otieno watched it unfold from a hotel room in Istanbul. He was frozen. He knew Zaid was smart, but this was something else. He hadn't just diffused the attack, he had weaponized it, turned it into a monument of his own integrity. Otieno hurled his glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. His phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. A deep voice, measured and cold, said, "We're withdrawing our support. The Ghana deal is gone. The Mozambique project too. We only work with men whose legacies outlive headlines. Good luck, comma." Click. Otieno sat down slowly, chest heaving. Everything was falling. And then, the email came. Subject line, "Final. Notice board termination." It was from the Al-Hakim group. Otieno opened it with shaking hands. The message was simple and ruthless. As of this date, Mr. Otieno Kamau is officially removed from all boards, committees, and projects affiliated with Al-Hakim Global Holdings. All previous roles, rights, and titles are null and void. You are no longer permitted on company premises, nor authorized to represent the brand in any capacity. Signed, Zaid Al-Hakim Thir, was a single sentence beneath the signature. Do not roar when they strike. They wait until the silence is complete. Otieno stared at it. Zayd had quoted him. A line Otieno once said, long ago, when they crushed a rival deal in Casablanca. He whispered it now like a curse. Then he stood, walked to the mirror, and stared at himself. Not the strategist, not the brother, not even the traitor, just a man. Suddenly, no one. In Liwa Zaid sat cross-legged on the rooftop of his estate, the stars blinking silently above him. He held a photograph in his hands, one of him and Otieno standing on a construction site in Senegal during their early days. Both of them dusty, tired, but smiling. He ran his thumb slowly over Otieno's face in the picture. "I meant every word," he whispered. "But so did you. Back then." He placed the photo down, stood, and looked out toward the horizon. Layla approached behind him. "It's done. He's out. The group is secure. Investors are calm." Zaid nodded. "And the court filings filed this morning. Civil action. Quiet, no media." "Good," he said. "I want him stripped, but I don't want him destroyed." Layla was surprised. "No criminal charges." "No," Zaid said, after a long pause. "Let him live with the weight. That's a harsher sentence than any jail." She studied him. He might come back. He might try again. Zaid turned to her, eyes steady. "Let him. The door is closed. But I'll always hear him if he knocks. I just won't open." Layla said nothing more. Zaid picked up his prayer beads and descended the stairs. His empire was intact. His reputation, perhaps stronger than ever. But something inside him was gone. Not anger, not pain, just silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after fire has taken everything it wanted and left you standing in the ash. Otieno Kamau returned to Nairobi 2 weeks later, but not as the man who left it. Gone were the convoys, the suits tailored in Milan, the whispers of power in every boardroom he entered. Now, he walked alone, his passport stamped with the echo of disgrace, his fortune scattered across frozen accounts and revoked contracts. He wore sunglasses not for the sun but to hide his shame. The city had changed. Or perhaps, he had. As he stepped out of the taxi, The scent of dust and grilled maize filled the air, along with the rhythmic hum of matatas weaving through traffic. Children played in alleyways that once bore his name on charity plaques. But now, even the street murals that once honored him had been painted over with newer, bolder faces, young tech entrepreneurs, musicians, activists. The world moved fast. Faster than Betrayal could cash out. He walked through the crowded streets until he reached a nondescript building, a place he hadn't visited in over a decade. The orphanage. The place where he had first met Zaid. Back then, Otieno had been an ambitious NGO worker. Zaid was visiting as part of a philanthropy tour, fresh off the cover of Forbes Middle East. He remembered the children clinging to Zaid, mistaking him for royalty, and Zaid. He had knelt down face to face with a boy who had no shoes, and whispered, "You deserve the same future as my son." It was in that moment Otieno decided to follow him, and it was here that he came back to remember what he had once believed in. Sister Miriam opened the gate, gray-haired now, but eyes just as sharp. "Otieno Kamau," she said. "I thought you'd disappeared." "I did," he answered quietly. "But I'm here now." She studied him. "The children don't remember you, but I do. I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," she replied. "Then you might be ready to learn." She led him inside, said nothing more. In the courtyard, a group of children ran past, chasing a soccer ball. Laughter filled the space. It hurt more than silence. Otieno sat on a low bench, eyes on the dust rising beneath their feet. He didn't belong here anymore, and yet, he needed this. Because for the first time in years, he saw his reflection not in a mirror, or in headlines, but in the eyes of a child staring back at him. A boy with no shoes. Just like the one Zaid once knelt beside. He lowered his head, and wept. Thousands of miles away. In the United States, Zaid stood on a TEDx stage in New York City. He wore a simple navy suit, no tie. His signature prayer beads tucked into his jacket pocket. The room was packed. The audience, a blend of entrepreneurs, humanitarians, and curious minds who had come to hear from the man who turned empire into impact. But Zaid didn't speak of numbers. He didn't talk about wealth. He told a story, not of betrayal, but of awareness. "There was a time," he said, "when I believed loyalty was measured by how long someone stood beside you. I was wrong. Loyalty is measured by how far someone will go to protect your blind spots, especially when you're not looking." He paused. Pain teaches, and betrayal reveals. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, eyes locked with the audience. "Don't fear those who walk away. Fear the silence of those who stay while slowly carving your downfall." With every handshake, murmurs filled the room. Heads nodded. "But even betrayal is a gift," he continued. "It strips away the noise. It shows you who you are when the applause dies. And if you're lucky, it leads you back to your truth." He ended the talk not with a challenge but a question. Who are you when no one is watching? And would that person betray you too? The room rose to a standing ovation. But Zaid didn't smile. He didn't come for praise. He came for closure. Later that night, back in his hotel suite, Zaid opened a letter that had been delivered by private courier. No signature, no return address. Just 2 sentences written in neat handwriting. "You were right to end it. I was not the brother I claimed to be, but I remember every moment we built, and I hope someday you'll remember them, too, not with anger, but with peace." Inside the envelope, folded neatly, was the photo from Senegal. The same one Zaid had last seen in his own hands weeks ago, except this one was worn, carried, maybe cherished. He stared at it in silence, and for the first time, since it all began, something in him softened. Weeks passed. Zaid returned to the Emirates, stepping once again into his role. But something had changed. He began appearing more frequently at schools, in refugee camps, at community projects. His boardroom visits became shorter, his speeches more personal. The press began to shift the narrative. The trillionaire who now spends more time with the forgotten than the fortune. Investors called it rebranding, but Zaid knew better. It was recovery, because betrayal hadn't broken him. It had unmasked him, and now, he no longer needed the armor. In Nairobi, Otieno still walked the orphanage grounds every week, not as a benefactor, not as a leader, but as a man in repair. He planted trees, fixed broken desks, paid bills quietly. He never asked for thanks. And Sister Miriam never gave it. But one day, as she passed him while he painted a gate, she paused and said, "You're not the same man who left." He looked up, eyes tired but grounded. And for the first time in years, he smiled a real smile, the kind that doesn't hide shame, the kind that dares to rebuild. The scent of cardamom coffee lingered in the private study of the Al-Hakim estate. Morning sunlight filtered through the carved wooden screens, casting delicate shadows on the tiled floor. Zaid sat in a linen tunic, barefoot, the Quran closed. On the low table before him, outside, birds sang in the palm trees lining the courtyard, peaceful. But his mind was elsewhere. He had rebuilt the outer world, restored the structure, the systems, the foundation of his empire. Investors were loyal. The press had moved on. Shareholders cheered. But inside, something still waited unanswered. Because for all the strategy, all the silence, all the masterful retaliation, he had never asked the one question that haunted him. Why? Why had Otieno betrayed him? And more importantly, why had Zayd trusted him so blindly? He wasn't a man prone to naivete. In the corridors of power, trust was a luxury. You leased, not owned. And yet, with Otieno, he'd handed over more than just authority. He had handed over belonging, brotherhood, something sacred now. In the quiet hum of the morning, he realized it wasn't just betrayal that had hurt him, it was the illusion. He had believed they were the same two outsiders, defying expectations. One born in Nairobi's slums, the other in the shadow of oil tanks and sandstorms. They were meant to rise together. Zayd saw Otieno as the mirror. He needed someone who understood the hunger and the isolation. But perhaps he had seen Zayd, not as a mirror, but as a ladder, and ladders are meant to be climbed, not kept. Zayd stood and walked to the window, the wind catching the edge of his tunic. In the distance, the skyline shimmered. A kingdom built not of walls, but of decisions, of pain, of persistence. His phone buzzed. It was Layla. A package arrived from Nairobi, she said. Personal, marked only with your initials. I'm listening. It's a journal. Zayd frowned. Who's Otieno's silence? I haven't opened it, she added. Shall I have it delivered? Zayd paused. Then, no. Bring it to the Majlis. I'll read it there. Later that afternoon, under the shade of his family's traditional gathering room, Zayd opened the leather-bound notebook. It was worn, the edges frayed, the paper slightly yellowed. There was no preface, no greeting, just entries written, like confessions. The first dated back almost 15 years. March 4th, Zayd trusted me with the deal in Ethiopia. He didn't ask for a signature, just my word. I wonder if he realizes the kind of trust that requires. I've never had someone believe in me like that before. Zayd's hands tightened on the paper. He kept reading. April 12th today. I signed a deal in his name. He doesn't know it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't clean. I did it for both of us, but mostly for me. Each entry blurred the lines between loyalty and ambition. There was no gloating, bitterness, just a man trying to belong in a world that had never welcomed him. And slowly, somewhere between the pages, that desire turned into something else. I watched Zayd walk through the world as if it was his shape. Maybe it is. Maybe that's what makes me ache. Not because he has it, but because I never will. Zayd closed the book gently. He didn't need to read more. He understood Otieno hadn't betrayed him out of hatred. He'd betrayed him out of loss, not of money, but of self. Because even as Zayd welcomed him, the world had still reminded Otieno that he was a guest, a man permitted into wealth, but never allowed to own it entirely, not in the way Zayd did. And so, eventually, Otieno did what hurt men often do. He broke the one hand that never closed on him. That night, Zayd stood on the balcony overlooking the sea. A soft wind rustled his hair. Below, lanterns swayed in the gardens. Then beside him stood someone he hadn't spoken to in weeks. His younger brother, Sami, had returned from London just in time to witness the tail end of the Otieno scandal. He hadn't asked questions. He knew Zayd needed time. But tonight, Zayd spoke. He sent me his journal. Sami raised an eyebrow. Otieno. Zayd nodded. Sami waited. Said Ayd finally said. He didn't hate me. He envied the peace I walked with, the kind of peace you can't steal. You have to build it inside. Sami looked out over the water. Will you forgive him? Zayd exhaled. I already did, but that doesn't mean he comes back. Sami smiled faintly. You've changed. Zayd nodded. That was the point. The next morning, a private jet left Abu Dhabi bound for Ghana. On board was Zayd, a suitcase. And no entourage. No cameras followed him. No advisors tracked his movement. He arrived alone. He spent 3 days in the very villages where the solar programs had launched, speaking not to journalists, but to farmers, mothers, school children. He listened. He watched. He knelt in red earth beside the men who built the infrastructure his name had funded. He prayed in a small open mosque where goats wandered freely through the doors. On the final day, an elder approached him with a walking stick and a quiet voice. You are the man in the sky, he said in accented Arabic. Zayd smiled. No, I'm the man in the dirt. The elder grinned. Good. The dirt is where all things grow. When Zayd returned to Dubai, he didn't call a press conference. He didn't post. He simply got back to work slower this time. More intentional. He walked through his towers like a man who no longer needed to prove he owned them, because the empire wasn't the goal anymore. Peace was, and it had been built not through wealth, but through fire, and what survived. The news came quietly, tucked into the corner of a local Nairobi paper. Former executive Otieno Kamau opens Community Innovation Center in Kibora. No fanfare, no interviews. Just a photo of Otieno, in a plain gray shirt, standing in front of a modest building painted with the words, Dreams belong to everyone. Zayd saw it over breakfast. He stared at the page for a long time. It wasn't the center that struck him. It was the expression on Otieno's face. No smile, no grandeur, just clarity. A man who had stopped running. A man building without applause. He folded the paper. There was nothing left to avenge. He had reclaimed his empire. He had exposed the betrayal. And yet, here was Otieno, no longer his shadow. Just a man, at last, standing alone. doing something real. Zaid stood and walked to the mirror in his dressing room. For years, he had believed justice meant setting things right. But now, as he looked at his own reflection, he understood something deeper. Sometimes justice isn't the punishment, it's the space you leave behind for someone to change. He reached into the drawer, pulled out the photograph again, him and Otieno in Senegal, smiling in the dust. Then he opened a drawer beneath it and placed the photo inside. Next to old letters, a cracked watch, and his father's first wallet. Artifacts of a man who had learned, lost, and lived. That afternoon, Zaid walked through his corporate tower. Alone, the elevator doors opened to a lobby of glass and gold, but he ignored it. He took the stairs, one floor at a time, past walls bearing his name, past portraits of company milestones, past echoes of meetings that once felt like battles. He reached the rooftop terrace's favorite place. There, he looked out at the desert edge of the city, the place where glass met sand, where ambition met stillness. And he let go, not of Otieno, but of the part of himself that had needed to win, because now, he no longer wanted victory, he wanted meaning, and that he had found not through power, but through everything he had almost lost. The door behind him opened. It was Sami. "I figured you'd be up here," he said, approaching Zaid. Didn't turn. He built something, Sami, in the place where he was born, with no investors, no cameras, just hands. Sami was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's where we all begin." After the noise, Zaid finally smiled. "Maybe." They stood together, the wind rising gently over the city. No words, no plans, just two men watching the horizon, and far beyond that line 2 lives, once bound by fire, now separated by peace. It was late evening when Zaid returned to the place where it had all started, not the boardroom, not the desert estate, but the humble family home on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, where the walls were still painted in faded earth tones, and the garden smelled of dates and jasmine. His mother stood waiting at the door, her back slightly stooped now, but her smile as steady as ever. "I thought you'd forgotten this place," she teased softly. "Never," he said, stepping forward and kissing her forehead. "Inside everything was the same. The prayer rug in the corner, the old kettle hissing gently, the family photographs lining the shelf, one of Zaid as a child holding a plastic airplane, another of his father beside a work truck. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, as he used to. His mother poured tea in silence. Then, as if sensing the question he hadn't yet asked, she said, "You lost something, and found something better." Zaid nodded slowly. "I lost my brother, or the man I thought he was." "No," she replied gently. "You lost the dream that someone could carry your burdens without faltering, but maybe he carried them as long as he could." Zaid's throat tightened. "I miss who we were." She looked at him. "And what are you now?" "I'm not sure. Lighter maybe, not happier, but freer." She smiled. Then the fire served its purpose. He looked down at his tea. "So what now?" he asked. She reached for his hand. "Now, you build with what's left, not what was taken." 3 months later, Zaid stood in front of a classroom in Mauritania. No cameras, no investors, just a group of wide-eyed teenagers, notebooks open, hanging on every word. He wasn't here to speak about money. He was here to speak about integrity. He told them about failure, about pride, about mistakes, and he told them that power, without peace, is poverty. When the class ended, one girl approached him, her scarf bright blue against her brown skin. "Sir," she asked shyly, "is it true you lost everything?" Zaid chuckled. "No, I lost one thing, but it taught me how to protect everything else." She nodded like she understood, and somehow, she did. Back in Nairobi, Otieno Kamau swept the floor of the Innovation Center himself. The children didn't know who he used to be. They just knew he showed up, that he taught them code, that he stayed late to listen, that he never lied, and that was enough. One evening, a package arrived for him. No name, no note. Inside was a framed photograph. 2 men, standing in Senegal, their faces dusty, their arms linked in laughter. Otieno stared at it for a long time. Then he hung it above the whiteboard, right where the sun hit every morning. And somewhere, across the miles, under a different sky, Zaid al-Hakim stood once again in silence. He had built towers, commanded billions, but his greatest act of power was letting go. Not to forget, but to make room for something deeper. Because in the end, legacy isn't what people remember about you, it's what they become because of you.